The scorching sun hung heavy over the Texas plains in the summer of '73, turning the earth into a cracked canvas of desperation. Reverend Jacob Carter, a man whose faith had once burned brighter than the noonday sun, now felt as hollow as the abandoned whiskey bottles littering the trail. His sermons, once fiery enough to make sinners weep, now tasted like dust in his mouth. The townsfolk of Dustvale still nodded respectfully, but Jacob knew the truth. He was just going through the motions, a puppet in a starched collar. That afternoon, he found himself wandering beyond the town limits, his boots kicking up clouds of ochre dust. The heat was a living thing, pressing down until even the vultures seemed too weary to circle. Then he heard a sound that didn't belong in the silence. A groan, ragged and human, leaking from the sagging mouth of the old Miller barn. Folks said the place was cursed after a poker game gone wrong, left 3 men buried out back, but Jacob had never put stock in ghost stories. Until now. The stench hit him first blood sweat and something rancid. Then he saw the boy no older than 16 lashed to a support beam with barbed wire. His face was a mess of bruises, one eye swollen shut, but the other locked onto Jacob with terrifying clarity. "Preacher!" The kid spat, his voice raw. "You here to save me or pray over my corpse?" Jacob's hand shook as he worked the wire loose. The boy Tommy, he rasped, was a runaway from the Lazy Q Ranch, where the foreman had a habit of correcting troublemakers with a branding iron. "Ain't your fight," Tommy muttered when Jacob hoisted him up. But the Reverend had spent too long polishing pews while the world rotted outside his church doors. A gunshot split the air, and the barn door exploded inward. Silhouetted against the light stood Clyde Harker, the Lazy Q's foreman, his colt gleaming like a sinner's smile. "Well now," Clyde drawled, "looks like we got us a shepherd strayed too far from his flock." Jacob's pulse roared in his ears. He'd never held a weapon heavier than a hymn book, but the weight of Tommy's stare, equal parts fear and defiance, lit something primal in his gut. Later, he wouldn't remember grabbing the rusted pitchfork leaning against the wall. Only the way Clyde's smirk died when Jacob stepped between him and the boy, his voice steady for the first time in years. "You'll touch him again when hell freezes over." The standoff lasted seconds, maybe minutes, time bent like a bad gambler's luck. Then Clyde laughed, tipped his hat, and vanished into the glare, but not before promising this wasn't over. As the dust settled, Tommy limped forward and shoved a crumpled wanted poster into Jacob's hand. The face staring back wasn't Clyde's. It was the Lazy Q's owner, Sheriff Elias Boone. Back in Dustvale, the church bell tolled for evening prayer. Jacob let it ring. Some sins couldn't be washed away with pretty words. Some required a reckoning and a man willing to get his hands dirty. The Reverend tucked the poster into his Bible, the pages whispering like dry leaves. For the first time in a long while, he felt alive. The barn door groaned like a dying man as Jacob Carter shouldered it open, the stench of rot and iron hitting him like a fist. Dust swirled in the slanted light, catching on the blood smeared across the hay-strewn floor. And there she was, Annie Cole, her wrists raw from the ropes, her cornflower blue dress now a canvas of violence. The blood spreading from her thigh wasn't just a wound, it was a confession in crimson. Jacob's stomach turned as he knelt beside her. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her fingers clutching at his sleeve with surprising strength. "Don't look," she rasped, but the preacher had already seen the words carved into her flesh. She saw too much. The letters were jagged, deliberate, the work of someone who took their time. Then Annie's hand shot out, gripping his wrist with a feverish intensity. "The ledger," she whispered, "under the third stall. Sheriff Boone's been selling girls to the mining camps." Her voice cracked, but her eyes burned with a fury that belied her broken body. "I counted 12. Before they caught me." A boot crunched hay outside. Jacob's head snapped up as the shadow of a man filled the doorway. Deputy Grady Boone's right hand, his shotgun glinting in the half-light. "Well, well," Grady drawled, spitting tobacco onto the dirt. "Preacher man playing hero." Jacob's mind raced. The Bible in his coat suddenly felt as heavy as a tombstone. Then Annie's nails dug into his palm, her whisper frantic. "The stall, now." As Grady stepped inside, Jacob lunged for the third stall, his fingers scrabbling in the dirt until they hit cold metal. A rusted strongbox, its lock busted open. Inside, a ledger thicker than a hymnal pages crammed with names, dates, and dollar amounts next to words like fair-haired 15 winters unbroken. Grady's laugh cut through the barn. "Ain't no use running Reverend. Boone's got the whole town eating from his hand." He racked the shotgun, "including your sweet little congregation." Jacob's vision narrowed. The weight of the ledger in his hands wasn't just paper. It was a reckoning. He thought of the Sunday school children singing off-key, the widows dropping coins into the collection plate, all while Boone's men picked their next shipment right under the steeple. Then Annie moved. With a guttural cry, she flung a rusted horseshoe at Grady's head. It missed, but the distraction was enough. Jacob charged, driving his shoulder into the deputy's gut. They crashed into the wall, the shotgun discharging into the rafters with an ear-splitting boom. Hay rained down as Grady's head struck a post twice before he slumped unconscious. Panting, Jacob turned back to Annie. Her face was ashen, but she managed a grim smile. "Guess even shepherds gotta fight wolves sometimes," she muttered. Outside, the wind carried the distant clang of the church bell. Sunday service was starting. Jacob tucked the ledger into his coat, his fingers brushing the worn spine of his Bible. The words, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," suddenly took on a darker meaning. Boone's reckoning wouldn't come from a pulpit. It'd come with a gun. The branding iron's mark on Annabeth's shoulder wasn't just a scar, it was a signature. Mason Graves' cattle brand, the Circle G burned into human flesh like she was nothing more than stolen livestock. That revelation hit Jacob Carter like a shotgun blast to the chest. He'd baptized Graves' children, presided over his wife's funeral, never suspecting the richest rancher in the territory was running a darker operation behind his whitewashed fences. The cabin's floorboards creaked under Jacob's boots as he paced the ledger from the barn splayed open on the rough-hewn table. Names, dates, dollar amounts, and next to each entry, a chilling description: fiery fights, or docile fair-skinned. The last page made his hands shake a shipment scheduled for tomorrow night destination, Silver Mesa Mining Co. Annabeth's weak voice cut through his rage. "They're moving 12 more at moonrise." She sat propped against the wall, her fingers tracing the brand on her shoulder. Graves' men use the old mission road. Sheriff Boone rides point with a deputy looks legit to anyone watching. Jacob's jaw tightened. He'd walked that very road last Sunday, Bible in hand, nodding at Boone like the man wasn't the devil himself. The memory soured in his gut. A sudden knock at the door froze them both. 3 sharp raps, too loud for a friend, too bold for an enemy. Jacob palmed his Colt just as the door swung open to reveal Old Man Henderson, the town's toothless drunk, swaying on the threshold. "Preacher," he slurred, reeking of rye whiskey. "You best know Graves put a $500 bounty on some runaway whore." His bloodshot eyes slid past Jacob to Annabeth, and double that for the fool hiding her. Jacob's finger hovered over the trigger. Henderson wasn't a threat, just a desperate man swimming in debt, but his next words turned the air to ice. "They're burning down the church at dawn. Graves says it's time folks remembered who owns this town." The lantern light flickered as the door slammed shut behind Henderson. Annabeth's bandages rustled as she struggled upright. "You need to run," she said, but Jacob was already yanking up a floorboard, revealing a rusted strongbox. Inside lay a twin set of Walker Colts, his brother's guns unused since the war. "Silver Mesa's 30 miles west," he said, tossing her a canteen and a knife. "Moonrise gives us 6 hours." He spun the cylinder of a revolver, the click, click, click like a death watch beetle. "You up for some reckoning, Miss Cole?" Her grin was all feral light, no mercy. "Thought you'd never ask, preacher." Outside, the wind carried the scent of coming rain and the distant echo of church bells. Jacob didn't look back. Some altars needed burning. Some prayers only got answered with lead. The fire crackled low in the hearth as Annabeth's fingers trembled around the tin cup of broth. The M on her shoulder seemed to pulse in the firelight, a grotesque monument to Mason Graves' empire of lies. Jacob watched her throat work as she swallowed the way her eyes darted to the cabin door every few seconds. She wasn't just healing, she was waiting for the axe to fall. Then she did something unexpected. With a sudden violent motion, she hurled the empty cup against the far wall. The clatter echoed like gunshot. "Damn it, preacher!" She spat, her voice raw with something fiercer than pain. "You sitting there with your poultices and prayers, you think this ends with bandages and broth." Her hands fisted in the blanket. "Abernathy's dead. Graves owns the sheriff. And that brand on my shoulder?" She gave a mirthless laugh. "That's his cattle mark. Means he thinks he owns me too." Jacob didn't flinch. He'd seen this before, the moment when grief turned to gunpowder. He reached into his boot and slid a folded paper across the floor to her. Found this in Graves's ledger. Annabeth smoothed the crumpled page. A map hand-drawn with a red X marking a canyon west of Silver Mesa. Beneath it, in Graves's looping script, Abernathy's cache. "Move before the spring rains." "The old man didn't just die," Jacob said quietly. "He was hiding something. Something worth killing for." Outside, an owl cried, or maybe it was a signal. These days, he trusted nothing. Annabeth's fingers traced the map like a blind woman reading scripture. When she looked up, her eyes were wildfire. "I know this place. Abernathy took me there when I was a girl." She swallowed hard. "There's a mine shaft behind the waterfall. His real deed's probably stashed there." A log collapsed in the hearth, sending up a shower of sparks. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped too close for comfort. Jacob stood his shadow stretching long across the wall. "Graves's men will be watching the roads," he murmured. But Annabeth was already on her feet, swaying only slightly as she grabbed his arm. "Then we don't take the roads." She limped to the window, pointing northwest, where the stars burned cold over the mesa. "There's a path the Comanche used, runs straight through the Badlands. No posse would follow us there." Jacob studied her, the set of her jaw, the way her battered body still carried itself like a loaded weapon. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was a reckoning. He nodded toward the bedroll where his brother's Colts lay wrapped in oilcloth. "Can you shoot Wildquark's eye?" Annabeth's smile was all teeth. "Better than you pray, preacher." As they packed supplies by candlelight, the wind picked up, howling through the chinks in the cabin walls. It sounded like a warning, or maybe a war cry. Somewhere out there, Mason Graves was sitting down to supper, smug in his victory. He wouldn't be smiling long. The stew pot hissed as Annabeth let the wooden spoon clatter against its rim. The fading sunlight caught the scars on her wrists, thin white lines against sun-browned skin as she turned to face Jacob fully. There was a challenge in her stance, hips cocked slightly, one hand resting on the knife at her belt. The same knife she'd used to skin rabbits last week. The same knife she'd pressed into Jacob's palm 3 nights ago when he jolted awake from a nightmare whispering, "Never sleep unarmed again." "You staring at my scars or my stew, preacher?" Her voice was low teasing, but her eyes were dead serious. Jacob's fingers flexed against the rifle stock. He could still smell gun oil and the faint metallic tang of blood, not from battle, but from the deer he'd dressed that morning. A far cry from the incense and hymn books of his old life. "Neither," he said, stepping closer. "I'm staring at the woman who walked 7 miles on a busted ankle to bring me willow bark when I had fever." A shadow crossed Annabeth's face. She reached into her apron pocket and tossed something onto the table between them. A silver sheriff's star, bent and tarnished with 3 notches filed into its edge. "Found this in your saddlebag last week," she said. "You weren't always just a preacher, were you?" The air left Jacob's lungs. 10 years gone, and that damned badge still carried the weight of a coffin. Outside, a tumbleweed scraped against the cabin wall, like skeletal fingers. "Texas Rangers don't retire." Annabeth continued, her voice softer now. "They quit, or they die." She picked up the star, running her thumb over the notches, each one a man he'd buried. "Which was it for you, Jacob?" The fire popped, sending embers swirling up the chimney. Jacob could still hear the screams from that canyon outside El Paso, still see the way the smoke had curled from his Colt's barrel after he'd put a bullet between his own partner's eyes. Turned outlaw. Had to be done. The Rangers had given him a medal. He'd left it on the captain's desk and walked straight into the first church he found. "Both," he said at last, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. His calloused hand cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing the brand on her shoulder. "Till you." Annabeth's breath hitched. For a heartbeat, they stood frozen, the gunslick and the branded woman, the liar and the truth-teller. Then she fisted her hands in his shirt and yanked him down, her mouth crashing against his with the same ruthless precision she used to clean game. The stew boiled over hissing on the stove, but neither moved to stop it. Some fires were meant to burn. A sudden crack from the wood snapped them apart. Jacob's hand went to his revolver as Annabeth snatched the rifle from the table in one fluid motion. Through the warped glass of the cabin window, torchlight flickered between the pines. "Riders," Annabeth breathed. "6, maybe 7. Jacob pressed the bent star back into her palm, his lips grazing her ear. "Welcome to the Rangers, darlin'." Outside, the first gunshot split the twilight. The riders reined up 50 yards from the porch, their horses stamping restless circles in the dirt. Clyde spat tobacco juice into the dust, his hand resting on the pearl grip of his revolver. "Well, ain't this sweet," he drawled. "The runaway whore and the backslid preacher playing house." Jacob didn't flinch. The Winchester felt like an extension of his arm the way it had all those years ago when he'd worn a Ranger's star. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. Not Annabeth slipping away, but Old Man Henderson stepping out, a double-barreled shotgun leveled at Clyde's chest. Funny thing, Henderson rasped his bloodshot eyes clearer than they'd been in years. "Turns out Mason Graves been skimming my pension checks. Ain't that right, Ree?" The lean gunman stiffened in his saddle. Henderson's shotgun never wavered. Annabeth moved like quicksilver, darting to the rain barrel and overturning it with a kick. The hollow thunk revealed the stashed Winchester and bandolier beneath. Jacob's lips curled in a feral grin. While he'd been tending wounds, she'd been preparing for war. Clyde's laugh was all nerves. 3 against 2 old men and a broken bitch. The bullet took his hat clean off. Every head swiveled to the ridge where a figure sat astride a paint horse rifle smoke curling from the barrel. Sunlight glinted off the badge pinned to her homespun shirt, Annabeth's mother's wedding brooch polished to a shine. Make that 3 against 3 called Mary Louise Henderson, the old man's daughter, who everyone thought had run off to Denver. The same girl Graves's men had recruited for Silver Mesa last spring. Her cheek bore a fresh scar, but her aim was steady as the grave. Ree's hand inched toward his holster. Jacob's voice cut through the tension like a Bowie knife. "First man to draw dies slow." He didn't need to shout. The years of preaching gave his words the weight of damnation. A horse whinnied nervously as the standoff stretched. Then, from the cabin's shadowed doorway, a new sound froze them all, the distinctive click-click of a sawn-off shotgun being cocked. "Actually," said a voice thick with Comanche blood, "it's 3 against 4. Standing there in the gloom was Tom Red Wolf, the quiet blacksmith Annabeth had saved from a lynching 2 winters back. The scars on his wrists from Graves's rope stood out stark as he stepped into the light, both barrels trained on Ree's belly. Clyde's face went the color of spoiled milk. These weren't the broken souls Mason Graves had expected. These were the people he'd trampled on, the ghosts of his misdeeds come calling. Annabeth flipped her knife and caught it by the blade, her eyes never leaving Clyde's. "Tell Mason something for me," she said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "The Circle G's about to become a grave." The wind carried the scent of coming rain and gunpowder. Some storms didn't pass. They raged. The brute's neck snapped with a sound like green wood splitting. His body crumpled to the ground just as a new sound cut through the gun smoke, the rhythmic pounding of more hooves. Not the scattered approach of hired guns, but the disciplined thunder of a full posse. Annabeth wiped her blade clean on Ree's shirt and looked to the ridge. A dozen riders fanned out along the crest, their silhouettes black against the setting sun. At their lead rode a figure in a tailored duster, his silver spurs glinting. Mason Graves had come to finish the job himself. Jacob spat blood into the dirt and scooped up Clyde's fallen revolver. The weight felt familiar, like shaking hands with an old enemy. "Mary Louise," he barked, never taking his eyes off the ridge. "Get your paw inside." The girl didn't move. She just worked the lever on her Winchester with a metallic click-clack. "Ain't running no more, preacher." Tom Red Wolf stepped forward, his shotgun broken open over one arm as he fed fresh shells into the breech. "Graves took my land, my sister." He snapped the barrels shut. "Today he pays." The wind shifted, carrying the acrid scent of coal oil. Annabeth's eyes went wide. "The barn," she hissed. Through the swirling dust, they could see 2 of Graves's men touching torches to the dry timbers. Flames leapt up with greedy fingers, the same way they'd devoured Abernathy's ranch, the same way they'd take this cabin and everyone in it. Graves' voice carried across the distance, smooth as poisoned whiskey. "Come out with the girl and I'll make it quick for the rest of you." Jacob's laugh was a harsh, broken thing. He pressed the revolver into Annabeth's hand, the one marked with Clyde's blood, and pulled her close. "Remember what I told you about the Rangers." His breath was hot against her ear. "We don't retire." The first fire arrow arced through the twilight like a falling star. It struck the rain barrel with a thunk, flames licking at the dry wood. In the dancing light, Annabeth saw the truth written on every face around her. Henderson's grim determination, Mary Louise's cold fury, Tom's quiet rage. These weren't victims. They were an army. She raised Clyde's pistol and sighted down the barrel at Mason Graves's smug face. The world narrowed to the space between the hammer and the bullet. Some silences needed breaking. The last shovelful of dirt fell on Mason Graves's face with a finality that echoed through the canyon. Annabeth drove the spade into the earth with a force that sent vibrations up her arms. The grave was shallow, but it would do. Coyotes and time would do the rest. Eli wiped sweat from his brow with a sleeve streaked with dirt and blood. His hands shook not from fear, but from the aftershocks of violence. The moon cast long shadows across the fresh-turned earth, making the graves look like open wounds in the land. A rustling in the brush made them both reach for their weapons, but it was only Mary Louise, her dress torn and her face smudged with soot. She carried a burlap sack that clinked with every step. "Found Graves's strongbox," she said, dumping it at their feet. Gold coins spilled out glinting dully in the moonlight. Enough here to buy every soul in Dust Vale. Annabeth crouched, picking up a coin. The weight of it in her palm felt like justice. "Not buy," she corrected. "Burn." Tom Redwolf emerged from the darkness leading 2 saddled horses. "The others are waiting at the Comanche Trail," he said. His eyes lingered on the fresh graves. "You coming?" Eli looked at Annabeth. Her face was a map of scars and resolve more beautiful to him than any stained-glass saint. She nodded once, and he knew this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. As they mounted up, the first light of dawn touched the eastern hills, turning the dust to gold. Somewhere far off, a train whistle blew. The world kept turning, but Eli Matz and Annabeth Cole would never be the same. The wind carried the scent of sage and gunpowder as they rode west toward the Badlands, toward a future written in blood and paid for in gold. The preacher was dead. Long live the outlaws. The morning air carried the scent of charred wood from the barn, mixing with the earthy smell of turned soil. Eli stood at the edge of the porch, his boots scuffing against the warped boards where Clyde had died just hours before. The weight of the Colt at his hip felt different now, not like a burden, but like a promise. Annabeth stepped beside him, her fingers brushing the fresh scar on her shoulder where Graves's brand had been. In her other hand, she held a single gold coin from the strongbox, turning it over in the dawn light. "This won't buy forgiveness," she said, her voice rough with smoke and resolve. "But it'll buy us a fresh start." A sound made them both turn. At the edge of the property, where the trail wound toward the Badlands, stood a line of figures silhouetted against the rising sun. Mary Louise held the reins of 2 extra horses. Tom Redwolf carried a long rifle slung across his back. Old Man Henderson leaned on his shotgun like a cane, his daughter's hand on his shoulder. "You coming or not?" Mary Louise called, her voice carrying across the silent yard. Eli looked back at the little white church one last time. The morning light caught the cross atop the steeple, making it glow like embers. He remembered the first sermon he'd given there, all fire and brimstone, so sure of his righteousness. Now the building looked small. False. Annabeth pressed the gold coin into his palm and closed his fingers around it. Her touch was warm, real. "Preacher," she said, nodding toward the waiting horses. "Your congregation's calling." The wind picked up, carrying the sound of jingling spurs and creaking leather as they mounted up. Somewhere to the west beyond the Red Rock Canyons, there was a town called Mercy where no one knew their names, where a man could trade his Bible for a deed and a branded woman could disappear into legend. As they rode out, the first rays of sun set fire to the church windows, turning them into sheets of gold. Eli didn't look back. The road ahead was paved in blood and dust, and for the first time in his life he could see clearly. The posse moved as one, no longer prey, no longer victims, but something new, something dangerous. The West would remember them, or it would forget. It didn't matter. They were free. The morning sun stretched their shadows long across the desert as they reached the crossroads. A weathered signpost leaned drunkenly in the dirt, one arm pointing east toward civilization, the other west into the uncharted Badlands. Eli's hand hovered over the Bible in his saddlebag, the last remnant of his old life before letting it fall away. Annabeth nudged her horse alongside his. "You still carrying that weight?" she asked, nodding to the book. Eli studied the cracked leather binding. "Thought about leaving it on Graves's grave," he admitted, "but seems wrong to waste good kindling." Her laugh was sharp as a whip crack echoing across the canyon walls. She reached into her own bag and produced a bottle of Graves's finest whiskey stolen from the strongbox. "To new beginnings," she said, taking a long pull before passing it to him. The liquor burned, going down hotter than any sermon Eli had ever preached. As he wiped his mouth, movement caught his eye, a lone rider approaching from the east, kicking up a trail of dust. Mary Louise, her hair flying wild behind her, a bundle clutched to her chest. She reined up hard, her horse skidding to a stop. "Thought you'd want these," she panted, thrusting the bundle at Eli. Unwrapped it revealed a pair of well-worn ranger's gloves and a faded wanted poster, the one with Sheriff Boone's face. Tom Red Wolf appeared behind her, leading a pack mule loaded with supplies. "Figured you could use an extra gun," he said, tossing a Winchester to Annabeth. She caught it one-handed, working the lever with practiced ease. Eli looked at the ragtag group, the drunkard's daughter, the half-Comanche blacksmith, the branded woman, and the fallen preacher. Not a congregation. A posse. Annabeth spun the cylinder of her revolver, the metallic click like a punctuation mark. "So," she said, nodding toward the western trail, "we doing this the easy way or the fun way?" The whiskey bottle shattered against the signpost as Eli spurred his horse forward. Behind them, the first church bell of the morning began to toll a sound they didn't hear, a life they didn't miss. The Badlands swallowed them whole, their laughter carried away on the wind. Somewhere ahead lay Mexico gold mines, maybe even redemption. But for now, there was only the open road and the promise of a fight worth having. The West would remember their names, or it wouldn't. Either way, suited them just fine. The desert wind carried the last echoes of church bells away as their horses climbed the rocky pass. Below them, the town of Dustvale lay small and insignificant in the morning light, a place of painted lies and buried secrets. Eli turned in his saddle, his eyes finding the white steeple one last time. Not with regret, but with quiet satisfaction. Annabeth reined up beside him, her Winchester resting across her lap. "Still wondering if you did the right thing, preacher." Eli touched the folded wanted poster in his pocket, Sheriff Boone's face a constant reminder. "Only wondering why I waited so long," he said. A gunshot cracked in the distance, then another not aimed at them, but celebratory. Back in town, the people were waking to a new day. A day without Mason Graves's shadow. Mary Louise would see to that. Tom would make sure of it. The trail ahead wound through red rock canyons where no law had ever reached. Somewhere out there were other towns, other graves, other broken souls needing someone to stand with them. Eli adjusted his hat, feeling the weight of the Colt at his hip lighter now than the Bible had ever been. Annabeth nudged her horse forward without looking back. "Come on, preacher," she called over her shoulder. "Plenty more silence needs breaking in this world." And as the sun rose higher, burning away the last shadows of night, they rode west, not toward redemption, but toward the next good fight. The end, or perhaps just the beginning. What would you have done in their place? Could you have walked away from everything familiar to stand for what's right? The West was built on such choices. Share your thoughts below. And if you'd ride with these outlaws for justice, hit subscribe. More tales of courage and consequence await.